Hey everyone. Okay, since it's Lent, and we don't normally eat meat on Fridays during Lent, I will be making a shrimp patty mole. So shrimp patty, we make it with shrimp, but with ground shrimp, dry shrimp. So we're gonna be making that, and I'm gonna start with taking some dry chilies. I have 4 Puya Chiles, 2 California Chiles, and 4 of the, I believe they're Guajillo, yeah, they're Guajillo Chiles. So I'm going to put them in a bowl with some piping hot water over here, and I'm just going to let them steep, and that way they can soften up. I'm doing this ahead of time. You can always just boil the chilies until they're rehydrated and softened, and then use them once they're boiled and softened and rehydrated. So all done with the water. So I'm just gonna let it sit here until they're nice and soft, and then we'll get back to it. For our mole, we're also gonna add nopales or cactus into it. We're gonna place these in a bag, and I like a lot of cactus in mine. You don't have to use all of it, but I'm gonna cook the entire bag just so I can have extras cooked. And I'm just gonna add a piece of onion. It doesn't have to be big, just like a quarter of an onion. And we're gonna add water, just barely enough to cover the nopales, the cactus, because you don't even have to add it all the way up, because if you add too much water, they will foam up and they will spill over in your stove. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to turn this on. I want to say maybe like a low heat. If your stove has a dial, put it on 4. And then we're just going to throw in a pinch of salt to let them flavor. All right, here's another tip. Put a wooden spoon and leave it in the pot. This will actually help the foam, because the nopales, when they cook, they're gonna get the water's gonna get slimy and it's gonna get foamy. But what the spoon does, what I've noticed, is that it helps the foam not rise above the pot level, and it will help prevent any spillage onto your stove. All right, so the nopales, the cactus, have been cooking for 10 minutes. So you see how they were very vibrant green when we started, and now they are a very opaque green, kind of like an olive green. This means they're ready. So you can always test them out. Don't drop them onto your stove. They're nice and tender. Mine need a little more salt, so I'm gonna add another pinch of salt, and I'm gonna let them boil for another 2 to 3 minutes. And you see how I told you with the spoon in the pot, even though it's nice and slimy, the foam doesn't come up. All right, I have turned off my pot. My nopales are ready. I do not want to let them sit in there because they just get soggy, so I'm gonna turn them out into a bowl and a strainer, and I'm just gonna let them strain out. I'm just gonna move this over to on top of my pot, and see how slimy it gets at the bottom? You don't want any of that stuff. So just let them sit, let them be, and they'll be good to use in a few minutes. All right, everyone, so we're ready to start. We've left our chilies soaking in hot water. It's cold now. I have my nopales cooked already, so we're gonna start with the chili blend. So we're gonna take our chilies and we're gonna put them in our blender, and I'm going to blend them with the same water that I used to rehydrate the chilies. So I'm just gonna throw the whole thing in. Don't be afraid that it might be too much water. We're gonna need it all. So to this, I am going to add about 2 teaspoons of chicken base, and I will be adding 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And I'm just gonna take this and blend it all, and you're gonna make. Okay, so we're gonna take this and we're gonna blend it very smooth. You wanna make sure there's no chunks left in it, even though we are going to strain it. But the best mole, you want it to be very smooth and get as much as you can out of the chilies that we're gonna blend up. So let's take it to the blender. Chili blend is done. I'm gonna go ahead and pour it into my bowl. Let me turn you guys a little here. I'm gonna pour it into our bowl and I'm gonna strain it. I'm gonna help myself along with a spoon just to get it out of the strainer a lot faster. And like I said earlier, we want to get everything out the best we can, the most we can, I should say, out of these chilies. So in my blender, I'm going to add some chicken broth, not base. And I'm just going to shake it up. And pour. Alright, so it's been strained, so now we're going to go back in the blender. I'm going to pour that in there. And then what I'm going to do is, I have some leftover masa here that I had in my fridge. I'm going to use it to thicken up my mole sauce. You can use, if you don't have masa at home, you can use regular all-purpose flour or your gluten-free flour, whichever you have at home. And I'm going to add this gradually. And it helps if I put my lid on properly. I'm gonna add this gradually into the blender just because I wanna make sure I get the right texture in the sauce. So let's start. Luckily, I have the spout at the top. The color in it now, it's a little paler than when we started. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this and we're gonna pour it into our pot. But let's turn on the stove first. You want a deep pot to make the sauce because you want to be able to fit all of the mole in there along with the nopales, or you can even add potatoes if you like. I'm not going to, but you can. You can also make this if you don't like the shrimp patties. You can make it with chicken. You just boil the chicken, and instead of using canned broth, you just use your broth that you have left over from cooking your chicken in it. Okay, I added a little bit of oil to the pot because we want to cook this down, right? So we want to give it a little bit of texture, flavor. You're going to pour the whole thing in. And again, I'm going to use my chicken broth to thicken this up a little bit. Or not thicken it, sorry, to make more of it. But I'm going to use some of it to wash out the blender so I can get everything I got in here going. And I will be pouring the rest of my broth. Right now it looks super watery, but once it starts to cook down, you're gonna see it thicken up because of the masa that was in it. Again, if you don't have masa, you can use flour. So we're gonna let this, I'm gonna bring it to a bit of a boil. So we're gonna let this boil, and we're gonna let it, once it boils, we're gonna bring it down to a simmer, and we're gonna let it simmer for about 30 to 40 minutes. So while this is happening, I'm gonna start making the patties for the shrimp part of our shrimp patty mole. Okay, here we go. So we're gonna beat some egg whites, and I'm gonna separate my eggs. I'm gonna do 6 eggs. So I'm gonna take in my bowl here. You can use your hands to separate it, or if you're fancy and you have one of those egg yolk separators, go ahead and use it, but your hands work perfectly fine as well. So we're gonna set aside the yolks. We're only gonna use the whites for now. What we're gonna do is basically beat them and bring them up to a stiff peak, kind of like if you were baking or if you were making a meringue where you needed to get really fluffy and very stiff. So we're gonna do 6 eggs. And the eggs vary depending on how many patties you wanna make. 6 eggs sounds like a lot, but it won't be. Okay, I have all my egg whites in here. We're gonna close this and we're gonna just put it on low, and we're just gonna let it go until they become really fluffy and we have, like I said, stiff peaks. In the meantime, we're gonna come over here, and you wanna keep an eye on your mole. You wanna keep stirring. You don't wanna just leave, like set it and forget it. It's not one of those deals. Since it has a masa flour in it, it's gonna stick if you don't stir. So you need to make sure that you constantly stir it. If you wanna make all your patties first and then make the mole at the end, you can also do that. Once your mole boils, taste it for salt. If it needs more, then you add more at that point. Okay, so we're gonna get back to our egg whites, and when they're ready, we'll come back. Okay, so as you can tell, we've got stiff peaks, right? So we're gonna stir in the yolks now into the egg whites. You can try to do it one at a time or just do it very slowly. We just want to make sure that they all incorporate together. And we want them to play well together, right? Alright, so we're done here. I turned it off. I'm gonna take off my whisk. And so we have it blended now. Sorry, not blended, mixed. So I'm just gonna give it a quick mix with a spatula just to really get all the egg whites off the sides and mix together. And see how fluffy it still is. You're gonna see a little runny at the bottom, but that's okay. Don't over mix at this point. I'm gonna take a big serving spoon. This is probably like 2 tablespoons. And I'm gonna just take my ground shrimp, big heaping spoonful of it. I'm gonna add it in there. And I'm just gonna fold it in. So folding it means you're still mixing it together, but we're doing it softly so that. Alright, so I've mixed it together. See, now it's obviously completely different color, but it's still very fluffy. And I just folded in the shrimp into the batter. So I'm gonna just use the same spoon I used to throw in the shrimp, and I'm gonna use it to help myself with the process of making the actual patties. So over here I've been heating a pan with oil. It should be pretty hot. You can always test it out by just dropping the smallest amount of this in here. It needs a little more time before we actually start making our patties. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take a spoonful and dollop it into the oil, and I'm just gonna let it be. I'm gonna let it fry up on its own. You can do multiple at a time if you have a wide pan, obviously. And that's all your patties. So you're gonna leave them in the oil for about, I wanna say maybe a minute or so, minute and a half per side. Flip it and then take them out. I have a plate in the back with some paper towels to catch the excess oil. Alright, so see how nice and brown they are now, and they're still super fluffy. So I just flipped all of them. They look like donuts, but they're not. They're actually really good. Some people might look at these and go, ew, shrimp patties, but don't knock it till you try it. Okay, our mole's been boiling. I am done making the patties. So all I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take my nopales, my cactus, and I'm gonna throw some in here. Don't throw in the onion that you cooked it with because it's not gonna taste good. So I'm just throwing in my nopales, and that should be enough. If you wanted to add potatoes to it, you can add it when you put the mole sauce to cook. You can throw in your potatoes in at the same time. That way they simmer and they cook slowly, and the potato will probably help it thicken up even more. So as you can see, my mole is not that thin anymore. If you go on the back of the spoon, it tastes delicious. So I'm just gonna let the mole simmer a little bit, maybe like 5 minutes with the nopales in it, and then we'll be good to eat. Alright, our mole is boiling. It's done. I'm gonna turn it off, and I'm just gonna let it rest. Letting it rest is gonna get it to thicken up some more, and then I have my patties on the side. I do not add the patties into the mole right away because then they get soggy. It is fluffy egg. It will get soggy. So we will add the patties once we're ready to serve and eat.